원서 읽기 500번 읽기 도전 Bunnicula. 이제 막 일 마치고 와서 낭독 읽기를 시작해 보려고 합니다. 오늘은 이제 2독 끝내고 3독째 들어가게 되겠습니다. 3독째는 제가 역시 마찬가지로 앞에서 한번 했었는데 섀도우 리딩으로 한번 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. 3독 500번까지 많이 남았지만 열심히 한번 해보도록 하겠습니다. The Bunnicula. 자, 제목 얘기하고 있어요. Okay, Book 1, Bunnicula, A Rabbit Terrier of Mystery by Deborah and James Hall. Editor's note. The book you are about to hear was brought to my attention in a most unusual way. One Friday afternoon, just before closing time, I heard a scratching sound at the front door of my office. When I opened the door, there before me stood a sad-eyed, droopy-eared dog, carrying a large plain envelope in his mouth. He dropped it at my feet, gave me a soulful glance, and with a great quiet dignity, sauntered away. Inside the envelope was the manuscript of the book, together with this letter. Gentlemen, the enclosed story is true. It happened in this very town to me and the family with whom I reside. I have changed the names of the family in order to protect them, but in all other respects, everything you will read here is factual. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Harold. I came to writing purely by chance. My full-time occupation is dog. I live with Mr. and Mrs. X, called here the Monroes, and their two sons, Toby, aged 8, and Pete, aged 10. Also sharing our home is a cat named Chester, whom I am pleased to call my friend. We were a typical American family, and still are, though the events related in my story have, of course, had their effect on our lives. I hope you will find this tale of sufficient interest to yourself and your readers to warrant its publication. Sincerely, Harold X. Bunnicula. Chapter 1. The Arrival. I shall never forget the first time I laid his now tired old eyes on our visitor. I had been left at home by the family with the admonition to take care of the house until they would return. That's something they always say to me when they got around. Take care of the house, Harold. You are the watchdog. I think it's their way of making up for not taking me with them, as if I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and still see the screen. And the people think you are being impolite if you fall asleep and start to snore, or scratch yourself in public. No, thank you. I'd rather be stretched out on my favorite rug in front of a nice, whistling radiator. But I digress. I was talking about the first night. Well, it was cold. The rain was pelting the windows. The wind was howling, and it felt pretty good to be indoors. I was lying on the rug with my head on my paws, just staring absently at the front door. My friend Chester was curled up on the brown velvet armchair, which years ago he'd staked out as his own. I saw that once again he'd covered the whole seat with his cat hair, and I chuckled to myself, picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there is nothing that frightens Chester more than the vacuum cleaner. In the midst of this reverie, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get up and see who it was. I knew it had to be my family, the Monroes, since it was just about time for the movie to be over. After a moment, the front door flew open. There they stood in the doorway, Toby and Pete and Mom and Dad Monroe. There was a flash of lightning, and in its glare, I noticed that Mr. Murnau was carrying a little bundle. A bundle with tiny, glistening eyes. Pete and Toby bounded into the room, both talking at the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, "Put him over here, Dad!" "Take your boots off, you're soaking wet," replied his mother, somewhat calmly, I thought, under the circumstances. "But Mom, what about the... First, stop dripping on the carpet." "Would somebody like to take this?" asked Mr. Murnau, indicating the bundle with the eyes. "I'd like to remove my coat." "I will," Pete yelled. "No, I will," said Toby. "I found him." "You will drop him." "I will not. You will too." "Mom, Pete punched me." "I'll take him," said Mrs. Murnau. "Take off your coat this minute." But she became so involved in helping the boys out of their coats, and that she didn't take him at all. My tranquil evening had been destroyed, and no one had even said hello to me. I whimpered to remind them that I was there. "Harold," cried Toby, "guess what happened to me?" And then, all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I feel I must explain something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with great respect for his or her intelligence. That goes for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happened to them is explained to us. It's never been just, "Goodbye, Harold," or "Use the little box, Chester, at our house." Oh no. With us, it's, "Hey, Harold, Dad got a raise, and now we're in a higher tax bracket. Or come sit on the bed, Chester, and watch this Wild Kingdom show. Maybe you will see a relative." Which shows just how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Murnau is a college professor, and Mrs. Murnau is a lawyer. So we think of it as a rather special household. And we are therefore rather special as pets. So it wasn't at all surprising to me that they took the time to explain the strange circumstances surrounding the arrival of the little bundle with the glistening eyes now among us. It seems that they had arrived at the theater late, and rather than trip over the pit of the audience already seated, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tiptoed in and sat down very quietly so they wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who's the little one, sprang up from his chair and squealed that he had sat on something. Mr. Murnau told him to stop making a fuss and move to another seat. But in an unusual display of independence, Toby said he wanted to see just what it was he had sat on, and the usher came over to their row to shush them, and Mr. Murnau borrowed his flashlight. What they found on Toby's chair was the little blanket bundle that was now sitting on Mr. Murnau's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there in the center was a tiny black and white rabbit, sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to his neck with a ribbon. There were words on the paper, but the Monroes were unable to decipher them because they were in a totally unfamiliar language. I moved closer for a better look. Now, most people might call me a mongrel, but I have some pretty fancy bloodlines running through this vein, and the Russian Wolfhound happened to be one of them. Because my family got around a lot, I was able to recognize the language as an obscure dialect of the Carpathian mountain region. Roughly translated, it read, "Take good care of my baby." But I couldn't tell if it was a note from a bereaved mother or a piece of Romanian sheet music. A little guy was shivering from the fear and the cold. It was decided that Mr. Murnau and the boys would make a house for him out of an old crate and some heavy-duty wire mesh from the garage. For the night, the boy would make a bed for him in the shoebox. Toby and Pete ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Murnau went to the kitchen to get some milk and lettuce. Mr. Murnau sat down, a dazed expression in his eyes, as if he were wondering how he became to be sitting in his own living room in a wet raincoat with a strange bunny on his lap. I signaled to Chester, and the two of us casually moseyed over a corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think rabbits like milk," he answered. Chester and I were unable to continue our conversation because a deafening crash commanded our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "Mom, Toby broke the rabbit's house. I didn't, I just dropped it. Peter won't let me carry it. It's too big, Toby's too little." "I'm not, you're too." "Okay, fellas." Mrs. Murnau called out as she entered with the milk and breakfast. "Let's try to get it in here with as little hysteria as possible, please." Chester turned to me and said under his breath, "That lactose looks repulsive, but if there's any milk left, I get it." I certainly wasn't going to argue with him. I'm a waterman myself. At that moment, that crate arrived, Barry standing the train of being pulled in two directions at once. "Ma, Toby says he's going to keep the rabbit in his room. That's not fair. Harold sleeps in his room." Only sometimes I did when I doubt. I know he's got a leftover ham sandwich in his drawer. Toby's a nice kid, don't get me wrong. But it doesn't hurt that he shared his stash with me. It was, after all, at one of those late-night parties in Toby's room that I first developed my taste of chocolate cake. And Toby, nothing my preference, has kept me in chocolate cake ever since. Pete, on the other hand, doesn't believe in sharing. And the only time I tried to sleep on his bed, he rolled over on me and pinned me by my ears so that I couldn't move for the rest of the night. I had a cricket in my neck for days. "But he's mine," Toby said. "I found him." "You sat on him, you mean?" "I found him and he's sleeping in my room." "You can keep Smelly All Harold in your room and the Chester too if you want to, but I'm gonna keep the rabbit in mine." Smelly All Harold. I would have beaten his ankle, but I knew he had to change his socks per week. Smelly indeed. Mr. Murnau spoke up. "I think the best place for the rabbit is right here in the living room on that table by the window. It's light there, and he will get lots of fresh air." "Pete's taller than I am," Toby cried. "He'll be able to see the rabbit better." "Too bad, Squirt." "Okay," said Mrs. Murnau, through clenched teeth. "Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable, and then we can all get some sleep." "Why?" Peter asked. "I don't want to go to sleep." Mrs. Murnau smiled a little too sweetly at Pete. "Look, Ma," said Toby. "He's not drinking his milk." Chester nudged me in the ribs. "Didn't I tell you?" he asked. "Excuse me while I make myself available." "Hey," said Toby, "we gotta name him." "Can they wait until tomorrow?" asked Mr. Murnau. The boys shouted in unison. "No, he has to have a name right now." I have to say I agreed with them. It took them 3 days to name me, and those were the 3 most anxious days of my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying that they were really going to call me Fluffy, as Mrs. Murnau had suggested. "Well, all right," sighed Mrs. Murnau. "What about, say, Bonbon?" "Uh-oh, there she goes again," I thought. "Where does she get them?" "Yuck," we all said. "Well then, how about Fluffy?" she offered hopefully. Pete looked at his mother and smiled. "You never give up, do you, Ma?" Meanwhile, Chester, who had also been named Fluffy for a short time, was rubbing against Mrs. Murnau's ankles and purring loudly. "No, Chester, not now," he said, pushing him aside. "He wants to help us name him, don't you, Chester?" Toby asked, as he scooped him up into his arms. Chester shot me a look. I could tell this was not what he had in mind. "Come on, Harold," Toby called. "You've got to help with the name, too." I joined the family, and the serious thinking began. We all peeled into the box. It was the first time I had really seen him. So, this is a rabbit, I thought. He sort of looks like a Chester, only he's got longer ears and a shorter tail, and a moral in his nose. "Well," said Peter after a moment, "since we found him at the movies, why don't we call him Mr. Johnson?" There was a moment of silence. "Who's Mr. Johnson?" asked Toby. "The guy who owns the movie theater," Peter answered. No one seemed to like the idea. "How about the prince?" said Mr. Murnau. "Dad," said Toby, "are you kidding?" "Well, I had a dog named Prince once," he replied lamely. "Prince," I thought. "That's a silly name for a dog." "We found him at a Dracula movie. Let's call him Dracula," Toby said. "That's a stupid name," said Pete. No, it's not. And anyway, I found him, so I should get to name him." "Mom, you're not going to let him name him, are you? That's a favoritism, and I'll be traumatized if you do." Mrs. Murnau looked in wonder at Pete. "Please, Mom, please, Dad, let's name him Dracula," cried Toby. "Please, please, please." And with each please, he squeezed the Chester a little harder. Mrs. Murnau picked up the bowl of milk and moved toward the kitchen. Chester followed her every movement with his eyes, which now seemed to be popping out of his head. When she reached the kitchen door, she turned back and said, "Let's not have any more arguments. We will compromise. He's a bunny, and we found him at a Dracula movie. So we will call him Bunnicula. Bunnicula. That should make everybody happy, including me." "What about me?" muttered Chester. "I won't be happy until she puts down that milk." "Well, guys, is that okay with you?" she asked. Toby and Pete looked at one another, and then at the rabbit. A smile grew on Toby's face. "Yeah, Ma, I think that name is just right." Pete shrugged. "It's okay, but I get to feed him." "Okay, I'm gonna put the milk back in the fridge. Maybe he will drink it tomorrow." "What about Chester?" Toby said, dropping the frantic cat to the floor. "Maybe he would like it." Chester made a beeline for Mrs. Murnau and looked up at her plaintively. "Oh, Chester doesn't want any more milk, do you, Chester? You've already had your milk today." She reached down, patted Chester on his head, and walked into the kitchen. Chester didn't move. "Okay, bedtime," said Mr. Murnau. "Good night, Bunnicula," Toby said. "Good night, Count Bunnicula," Peter said sarcastically, in what I took to be his attempt at a Transylvanian accent. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw a flicker of movement from the cage. "Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester." I licked Toby good night. "Good night, Smelly Harold. Good night, dumb Chester." I drooled on Peter's foot. "Mom, Harold drooled on my foot." "Good night, Pete," Mrs. Murnau said with great finality as she came back into the living room, and then more calmly, "Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester." Mr. and Mrs. Murnau went up the stairs together. "You know, dear," Mr. Murnau said, "that was very clever. But Bunnicula, I could have never had thought of a name like that." "Oh, I don't know, Robert." She smiled as she put her arm through his. "I think Prince is a lovely name, too." The room was quiet. Chester was still sitting by the closed kitchen door in a state of shock. Slowly, he turned to me. "I wish they had named him Fluffy," was all he said. Chapter 2. Music in the Night. I feel at this time there are a few things you should know about Chester. He's not your ordinary cat. But then, I'm not your ordinary dog, since an ordinary dog wouldn't be writing this book, would he? Chester came into the house several years ago as a birthday gift for Mr. Murnau, along with 2 volumes of G.K. Chesterton, hence the name Chester, and the first edition of Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. As a result of this introduction to literature, and given the fact that Mr. Murnau is an English professor, Chester developed a taste of reading early in life. I, on the other hand, have developed a taste for books. I found Jonathan Livingston Seagull particularly delicious. From Chester's kittenhood on, Mr. Murnau has used him as a sounding board for all his students' lectures. If Chester doesn't fall asleep when Mr. Murnau is talking, the lecture can be counted a success. Every night when the family is sleeping, Chester goes to the bookshelf, selects his midnight reading, and calls on his favorite chair. He especially likes mystery stories and the tales of horror and the supernatural. As a result, he has developed a very vivid imagination. I'm telling you this because I think it's important for you to know something with Chester's background. Or I relate to you the story of the event following the arrival of Bunnicula into our home. Let me begin with that first night. It seems that after I went to sleep, Chester, still stewing over the lost milk, settled down with his latest book and attempted to ignore the rumbling in his stomach. The room was dark and quiet. This did not prevent his reading, of course, since, as you know, cats can see in the dark. A shaft of moonlight fell across the rabbit's cage and spilled onto the floor below. The wind and rains had stopped, and as Chester read Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher, he became increasingly aware of the eerie stillness that had taken their place. As Chester tells it, he suddenly felt compelled to look at the rabbit. "I don't know what came over me," he said to me the next morning, "but a cold chill ran down my spine." The little bunny had begun to move for the first time since he had been put in his cage. He lifted his tiny nose and he inhaled deeply, as if gathering sustenance from the moonlight. He slicked his ears back close to his body, and for the first time, Chatter said, I noticed the peculiar marking on his forehead. What had seemed an ordinary black spot between his ears took on a strange V shape, which connected with the big black patch that covered his back and each side of his neck. It looked as if he was wearing a coat. No, more like a cape than a coat. Through the silence had drifted the strains of remote and exotic music. I could have sworn it was a gypsy violin, Chester told me. I thought perhaps a caravan was passing by, so I ran to the window. I remembered my mother telling me something about the caravan when I was a puppy, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember what. What's a caravan? I asked, feeling a little stupid. A caravan is a band of gypsies traveling through the forest in their wagons, Chester answered. Ah, yes, it was coming back to me now. Station wagons? No, covered wagons. The gypsies travel all through the land, setting up camps around the great bonfires, doing magical tricks, and sometimes, if you curse their palms with a piece of silver, they will tell your fortune. You mean if I gave them a pork, they would tell my fortune? I asked breathlessly. Chester looked at me with disdain. Save your silverware, he said. It wasn't a caravan after all. I was disappointed. What was it? I asked. Chester explained that when he looked out the window, he saw Professor Micklewhite, our next-door neighbor, playing the violin in his living room. He listened for a few moments to the haunting melody and sighed with relief. I've really got to stop reading these horror stories late at night, he thought. It's beginning to affect my mind. He yawned and turned to go back to his chair and get some sleep. As he turned, however, he was startled by what he saw. There in the moonlight, as the music filtered through the air, sat the bunny, his eyes intense and staring, an unearthly aura about them. Now this is the part you won't believe, Chester said to me. But as I watched, his lips parted in a hideous smile, and where a rabbit's buck teeth should have been, two little pointed fangs glistened. I wasn't sure what to make of Chester's story, but the way he told it, it set my hair on end. Chapter 3. Some unusual goings on. The next few days passed uneventfully. I was very bored. Our new arrival slept all day, and Chester, whose curiosity had been aroused by the strange behavior of the rabbit that first night, had decided to stay awake every night to observe him. Therefore, he too spent most of his days sleeping, so I had no one to talk to. The evenings weren't much better. Toby and Pete, who used to play with me as soon as they got home from school, now ran immediately to that silly rabbit's cage to play with him, or at least they tried to. Bunnicula did not make the most energetic playmate. It took him quite a while to wake up each night, and then when he did awaken, he didn't do much except hop around the living room. He didn't play catch. He didn't patch. He didn't roll over to get his tummy rubbed. I couldn't understand why they played with him at all. I expected it was because he was new and different. But I was confident that they would soon tire of him and come back to Turkey all herald. Finally, on the morning of the fourth day, I caught Chester bleary-eyed over the water dish. He grumbled at me in a most unpleasant manner. You know, Chester, you were never exactly charming in the morning, but lately you've become downright grumpy. Chester growled in response. What are you doing this for anyway? What are you looking for? He's just a cute little bunny. Cute little bunny. Chester was amazed at my character analysis. That's what you'd think. He's a danger to this household and everyone in it. Oh, Chester, I said, with an indulgent smile. I think your reading has gone to your head. It's just because I do read that I know what I'm talking about. Well, what are you talking about? I still don't understand. I'm not sure yet, but I know there's something funny about that rabbit. That's why I have to keep alert. But look at you. You're exhausted. You sleep all the time. How can you call it alert? I'm awake when it's important. He sleeps all day, so I sleep all day. So just what you have seen since the first night that makes you uneasy. Well, said Chester, that is... At this point, Chester started to bathe his tail, which is a cat's way of changing a subject he finds uncomfortable. He then stumbled sleepily into the living room. So, I asked again, following him, what have you seen? Nothing, he snapped, and proceeded to curl up on his chair to go to sleep. After a moment, he opened one eye. But that doesn't mean there's nothing to see. For the next few mornings, it was the same routine. I'd be ready for a good romp around the living room, and Chester would go to sleep. Peter and Toby were at school. Mr. Monroe was at the university. He never did too much romping around anyway, and Mrs. Monroe was at her office. No one to play with the poor, neglected Harold. At first, I thought I could strike up a friendship with Bunnicula and maybe teach him a few tricks, but I could never wake him up. He was always waking up just about sunset when I wanted to take a snooze. A rabbit, I concluded, is cute to look at, but is generally useless, especially as a companion to dogs. So I would retire each day with my favorite shoe to the rug and chew. Now some people, especially Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, can't understand my taste for shoes and they yell at me for snacking on them. But I always say there's no accounting for taste. For instance, I remember one evening when Mr. Monroe picked some of his salt bars out of a bowl by his chair and dropped a green one on the floor. He didn't notice as it rolled across the room and landed near my nose. I decided this was a perfect opportunity to try one for myself. I placed it in my mouth and wished immediately that I hadn't. As the tears started running out of my eyes, I thought, what's wrong with my mouth? It's turning inside out. Mr. Monroe immediately noticed that something had happened. What's the matter, Harold? Are you looking for someone to kiss? Help! Help! I wanted to cry, but all that came out was an ooh sound. I oohed for days. So how can anyone who likes the green salt bars criticize me for preparing a nice penny roper or a bedroom slipper? But back to the matter at hand. One morning, Chester had news. That bunny, he whispered to me across our footboards, got out of his cage last night. Don't be ridiculous, I said. How could he break through that wire? Look how little he is. That's just it. He didn't break through any wire. He got out of his cage without breaking anything or opening any doors. I looked puzzled. So Chester told me the following story. Now, Harold, he said, I don't want you thinking I'm not a good watch cat, but after a few hours last night, I grew curious about the time. I went into the hallway, and the new clock they've got, the big one, that goes all the way to the ceiling. Well, see, it has this thing in the middle called a pendulum. At first, I figured I would just leave it alone. It looked like the spool they tied on a string and hung from the doorknob, and for me to play with when I was a kitten. Every time I hit that silly spool with my paw, it would swing back and hit me on the nose. I hated that toy, so naturally, when I saw this one, I decided not to have anything to do with it. I checked the time. It was midnight. I was all set to go back to the living room when something stopped me. Curiosity, I ventured. I suppose you could call it that. I prepared to think of it as a challenge of the unknown. I put one paw over my nose and reached out with the other one and gave it one good smack. I darn near broke my arm. It's still tender. See how swollen it is? He showed me his little paw. I couldn't see anything wrong, but I knew better than to argue with him. Oh, yes, I said, that looks terrible. You must be suffering awfully. You'd better go easy today. He limped dramatically, just far enough to display his new handicap, and continued. I couldn't even get to the pendulum. Somebody had put glass in front of it, and I was pretty mad. I was all set to go back, but at the same time, I couldn't help but watching the thing move back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It was just so easy to watch, and before I knew what had happened, I was waking up. You fell asleep? I asked incredulously. I couldn't help it. I didn't even know it had happened. But I looked up at the face of the clock, and it was 12:45. I'd been gone 45 minutes. I ran back into the living room, looked at Bunnicula's cage, and it was empty. I couldn't imagine where he was. Then I noticed a light coming from under the kitchen door. I went into crouch, stalking the light when I heard the refrigerator door close and the light went out. It must have been Mr. Monroe having his midnight snack, I suggested. No, that's what I thought. I jumped on my chair, curled up real quick and kept one eye open, pretending to be asleep. Slowly, the door to the kitchen squeaked open. This little head poked out from around the corner and looked to either side to see if the coast was clear. Then, guess who came bouncing out all by himself and with that idiotic grin of his plastered all over his face? Well, I guess it wasn't Mr. Monroe, I said. Not unless he wears bunny pajamas and gets very tiny at night. Bunnicula, huh? You get it. Unfortunately, I hadn't positioned myself so that I could see him get back into the cage. And I didn't want to let him know that I had seen anything, so I had to stay put. I still don't know how he got out or back in. At this point, Mr. Muller came downstairs to make breakfast. I wondered if Chester had dreamed the whole thing. He did admit he had fallen asleep, and as I've said, he has quite an imagination. But I was game. After all, there hadn't been any excitement in this place for days. Chester and I took our position under the kitchen table. We didn't have long to wait. Holy cow, Mr. Monroe yelped as he opened the refrigerator door. He took this funny-looking white thing out of the fridge and held it at arm's length. Peter, come down here. What is that? I whispered. Beats me, Chester answered. It looks like a white tomato. Very funny, I said as Pete came into the kitchen. Peter, have you been playing with your chemistry set in here? No, Dad, why? I thought this might be one of your experiments. Do you know what it is? See, Dad, it looks like a white tomato. Just then, Mrs. Monroe and Toby came in the door. What's all the fuss about? Mrs. Monroe asked. We were just trying to figure out what this is. Toby pulled it down so he could get a better look. Well, he said, it looks to me like a white tomato. Mr. Monroe took a good long look. You know, he said to his wife, it really does look like a white tomato. There's one way to find out, said Mrs. Monroe, who always was the practical one. Let's cut it open and see what's inside. Everybody gathered around the table. I jumped on a chair, and in all the excitement, no one noticed that I had my paws on the table, which under normal circumstances was discouraged, to say the least. Chester wasn't so lucky. Chester, get off the table, Mrs. Monroe said. Chester jumped onto Toby's shoulders, where he stayed to view the proceedings. Mrs. Monroe took her sharpest knife and cut cleanly through the thing. It fell into two halves. It's a tomato, all right, said Mrs. Monroe. Here are the seeds. But it's all white, Toby observed. And look, said Pete, it's dry. So it is, Mr. Monroe said, as he picked up one of the halves. There is no juice at all. Well then, what do you think? It's gone bad, I guess, though I've never heard of a tomato turning white before. Come on, she said, cleaning the table. Let's throw it out and have breakfast, and hurry to get your paws off the table. Right. Chester jumped down from Toby's shoulders and motioned for me to follow him into the living room. This had better be important, I said. They are cooking bacon. A white tomato, very significant, Chester murmured. So it's a white tomato, I said, edging my way back to the kitchen door. What did that have to do with the Bunnicula? I can tell you one thing, Chester said. I got a good look at the tomato. There were very suspicious marks on the skin. So? I believe they're teeth marks. So tonight I'm going to reread a book I read last year. How fascinating, I said, as the aroma of the frying bacon wafted across my nostrils. And what book might that be? The Mark of the Vampire. What? I stopped dead in my tracks. Need me tonight after the others have gone to sleep. You'd better take a nap today so you can stay awake. Chester closed his eyes. I shifted my look to Bunnicula, who seemed to be asleep in this cage. A tiny smile sat upon his lips. A happy dream, I wondered, or something else. My reverie was broken by the sound of a crunching bacon. I was in the kitchen in a flash. Chapter 4. A cat prepares. I almost didn't make it to my meeting with the Chester at that tonight. Toby had a feast in his room. It was a Friday night, and on Friday night, Toby gets to stay up and read as late as he wants to. So of course he needs lots of food to keep up his strength. Good food like cheese crackers, chocolate cupcakes, my very favorite, the kind with the cream in the middle. Pretzels and peanut butter sandwiches. The last I cannot abide because my mouth always gets stuck. Chocolate cupcakes with cream in the center, however, are another story. This particular evening, I stationed myself on Toby's stomach. Usually I'm a little more subtle, but having missed out on bacon at breakfast, I was not about to take any chances on the chocolate cupcakes with the cream in the center. Toby knew what I was after, but sometimes he thinks he's funny, and he plays little games with me. Hi, Harold. I'll bet you'd like a peanut butter sandwich, wouldn't you? Here, you have this one that's left over from yesterday, while I eat this boring old chocolate cupcake, which is nice and fresh and has cream in the middle. Okay, Harold? Ha, my sides are splitting. What's the matter? Don't you want the peanut butter sandwich? All right, I'll put it away for another night. Oh, here's something you might like. It's a green soul ball from that candy dish that was stuck to my sock. Would you like that, huh, pal? Oh boy, the kid is really hot tonight. No, huh? Well, I'd give you one of my cupcakes, but I know how much you hate chocolate. Would a little drooling on your stomach help convince you otherwise? Oh, you like chocolate? Okay, then. You can have both of them. One thing I have to say about Toby. Although he's got a rotten sense of humor, he's a nice kid. Naturally, once I'd eaten both cupcakes, which took approximately 4 seconds, I felt obliged to hang around, and I was grateful. What better way than to share a few of his cheese crackers? Well, Harold, Toby said sometime later, we'd had quite a party, but I have to go to sleep now. I can't keep my eyes open, so I'll have to wait until tomorrow to find out what happens in the next chapter. This is a good book, Harold. It's called Treasure Island, and it's by a man named Robert Louis Stevenson. It's kind of a hard reading, though. I have to keep looking the big words up in the dictionary, so it's taking me a long time to get through it. I've always had trouble with the words myself. Half the time they don't mean what I think they're going to, and then even when I do find out what they mean, I forget the next day anyway. You might say that I'm smart, but not just the scholarly type. But it's a really good story, Toby continued. It's all about the pirates and the little boy just like me. No dogs. And a parrot, Harold. A parrot. What's a parrot? Is there anything about the chocolate cakes? That's my idea of a treasure. Well, good night, Harold. If you're going to sleep here, you will have to get off my stomach because it's a little full right now. Good night, Toby. I called up at the foot of the bed, but I couldn't sleep trying to figure out what a parrot was. I thought it might be a lady pirate, since the words sound something alike, but then again, I thought it might be an umbrella. Chester would know, I thought, so I went downstairs to ask him. Well, you certainly took your time, Chester snapped as I sauntered casually into the room. I finished my book half an hour ago. Where were you? It just so happens I was discussing great works of literature with Toby. Since when is a Twinkie Wrappers considered a great work of literature? I decided to ignore that. Unfortunately, several chocolate crumbs fell from my mouth to the floor at precisely that moment. As a matter of fact, I said, trying valiantly to regain my dignity, we were talking about Treasure Island. Ever hear of it? Ever hear of it? He sneered. I read that when I was a kitten. Oh, then tell me, Chatter, what is a parrot? Chatter looked at me scornfully. A parrot, he said, is a tropical didactical bird, older, ctesiforms, that has a stout, curved, hooked bill. It's often crested, brightly variegated, and an excellent mimic. In other words, Harold, a parrot is a little bird with a big mouth. Oh, I said after a moment. I thought maybe it was an umbrella. Did you get so busy discussing parrot with Toby that you forgot you were going to meet me here? This is important, Harold. I still wasn't sure what a parrot was, but I decided this was not the time to pursue it. Come over here, Chatter commanded, indicating his chair, and let me show you this book. I looked at the chair. Chatter was already sitting in it, with a very large book open in front of him. I don't think that there's going to be room for both of us, Chatter, I said. Come on, you're wasting time. Just jump up here. I surveyed the scene carefully. I knew I would have to get a running start since there was just a tiny spot left for me and I would never be able to fit into it if I pulled myself up slowly. Apparently, I was taking too long for Chetter's liking. Will you get up here? He hissed. Okay, if that's what you want. I ran and jumped onto the chair, landing with a great cart plop. Chatter, where are you? I cried. I couldn't see anything but the back of the chair. I'd forgotten to turn myself around. I'm here, you great oaf. I turned my head. What are you doing on the floor? I asked. You knocked me off the chair. Now just stay put. I'm coming back up. I moved to the back of the chair, and the chair landed on the front. Now let's see, I said. We both have to see the book. You come over here, and I will move this way. I don't know if you've ever watched a cat try to decide where to sit, but it involved a lot of circling around, sitting, getting up again, circling some more, thinking about it, lying down, standing up, bathing a paw or tail, and circling. A dog, on the other hand, sits. This looks like a good spot, a dog will say to himself. He will then lower his body to the spot in question and is usually so secure in his decision that he will fall asleep immediately. Cheddar took what felt like 20 minutes to settle himself in, and just as I was drifting off, the kicks started. Come on, Harold, quit hogging the seat and wake up. What were you trying to do? Take a little cat nap? Ha ha ha. I yawned. Now, said Chester, turning to the book. Let's get down to the brass tacks. What exactly is on your mind? I asked. This book and that rabbit, Chester replied. Now tell me, Harold, have you noticed anything funny about that rabbit? No, I said, but I've certainly noticed a lot of funny things about you recently. Think about it. That rabbit sleeps all day. So do I. So do you. Furthermore, he's got funny little sharp teeth. So do I. So do you. Furthermore, he gets in and out of his cage by himself. What kind of a rabbit can do that? A smart one, I said. I could do it. We're not talking about you, Harold. We're talking about the rabbit. Now, where did they find him? At the movies. Yes, but what movie? Dracula, I said. So, he said quickly. Remember the note around his neck? What language was it in? An obscure dialect of the Carpathian mountain region, I answered smugly. He didn't know everything. Aha, Chester said. But what area of the Carpathian mountain region? Area? What's an area? I looked at him blankly. Transylvania, he cried triumphantly. And that proves my point. What point? What are we talking about? And don't forget the white tomato. That's most important of all. But what? This book, said Chester, disregarding me, tells us just what we need to know. What? I practically screamed. What does it tell us? What does this book have to do with the Bunnicula? What are you talking about? What's going on here? I can't stand it anymore. Chester regarded me coolly. You are really very excitable, Harold. That's not good for your blood pressure. I put my paws around his throat. Tell me, I said in a low, threatening voice, or I will squeeze you until you pop. Okay, don't get upset. Now this book tells you everything you've always wanted to know about vampires, but were afraid to ask. Personally, I had never wanted to know anything about vampires, but at the moment, I was afraid to tell that Chester. I still don't understand what vampires have to do with our furry friend. 1, Chester said. Vampires do not sleep at night. They sleep only during the day. The same holds true for this rabbit. 2, vampires can get in and out of locked rooms. Bunnicula gets in and out of his locked cage. This was beginning to interest me. Didn't you say something about the refrigerator? That's right. He got the refrigerator open all by himself. 3, vampires have long pointed teeth. They're called fangs. Well, don't we have fangs? No, we have canines. That's different. What's different about it? Fangs are more pointed, and vampires use fangs to bite people on the neck. Yuck! Who'd want to do that? Vampires would, that's who. Wait a minute. I saw Mrs. Marlowe bite Mr. Marlowe on the neck once. Does that mean she's a vampire? Boy, are you dumb. She's not a vampire, she's a lawyer. She bites necks. I don't think that's quite the same thing. No, Bunnicula does not bite people on the neck. At least, not so far. But he does bite vegetables. On the neck? I asked. Vegetables don't have necks, Harold. Vegetables are like that. It's like dogs. Dogs don't have brains. Dogs are like that. Oh yeah? I said. Of course he bites vegetables. All rabbits bite vegetables. He bites them, Harold, but he does not eat them. The tomato was all white. What does that mean? It means that he painted the vegetables? I ventured. It means that he bites the vegetables to make a hole in them, and then he sucks out all the juices. But what about all the lettuce and the carrots that Toby has been feeding him in his cage? Aha, what indeed, Chester said. Look at this. Whereupon he stuck his paw under the chair cushion and brought out with a flourish an assortment of strange white objects. Some of them looked like unironed handkerchiefs, and the others didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. Where are they? I asked. Chester smiled. Rectus and the carrot, he said. White rectus and carrot. I found them hidden behind his cage. I was aghast. What did it all mean? Could Chester be right? Was this a harmless-looking little ball of fluff really a vampire? So then Chester let out a yelp. Look, he said, the cage is empty again. Oh, we are fools. We will let him get out of our sight. It's your fault. My fault? You're the one who took 20 minutes to sit down. Well, if you hadn't locked me up in the first place. But wait a minute, why are we arguing? Let's find Bunnicula. Just then, we heard a click in the kitchen. Refrigerator. I whispered. Chester nodded. We jumped down and moved cautiously to the kitchen door. Shh! Chester warned unnecessarily as we crept along. Don't make any noise. We don't want him to hear us coming. Obviously, I retorted. The light went out under the door. They must have closed the refrigerator. Chester said, Easy now. We pushed the door open. The kitchen was dark. There was not a sound. Psst! Chester. What? I can't see. I can, but I can't see him. He's not here. There was a soft scamper across the linoleum, and we turned just in time to see a little white tail bounce out of the door into the living room. Drat, he would have missed him. Come on, Harold, let's see if we can catch up with him. Chester started toward the door. Which Chester? Was that on the floor by the refrigerator? He turned. This new object interested him more than following Bunnicula. Watch out, he said. I'll take care of this. He slunk across the room slowly, muscles taut, eyes alert. When he was about 6 inches away, he stuck out his paw, closed his eyes, and batted at the object tentatively. I don't think he made any contact. Get closer, I said. Chatter's eyes popped open. Who's the cat here? He asked. I know what I'm doing. And he proceeded to bat the air 3 more times. What is it? I squealed it, as my throat contracted in fear. I don't know yet, but whatever it is, it's not alive. Oh boy, if I wait for you, we'll be here all night. I walked bravely to the object and sniffed it. Well? Asked Chester. Beats me. Chester came closer. After a moment of close examination, he gasped. I jumped. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Harold, Chester blurted. What? Yes, it's... What is it, Chester? It's a white zucchini.